Welcome to the Velvet Verdict, honest conversations about how we drift apart and how we find our way back. I'm Velvet. Let's get into it. The office door swings shut, and the silence that follows is heavy with something more than just the end of a meeting. It is the quiet realization that the person you spent the day with, the one who shared your thoughts, your frustrations, your moments of connection, is now gone. For many, this transition from the structured world of work to the solitude of home is where the feeling of isolation truly sets in. The data tells us that the modern workplace, while designed for efficiency, often fails to foster the deep, sustaining relationships that keep our spirits high. We are physically present, yet emotionally distant. This isn't just a feeling, it is a measurable crisis. The Surgeon General has warned that loneliness is a public health emergency, and the office is a primary battleground where this epidemic grows. When we leave our desks, we don't just carry our keys. We carry the weight of a day spent without the kind of genuine engagement that makes life feel worth living. For men, this often means retreating into a shell of silence where the day's interactions feel transactional rather than human. For women, it can mean a different kind of exhaustion, where the constant performance of connection leaves little room for authentic rest. But there is a way through this. The fact that we feel this pang of isolation proves that we are wired for more than just tasks and deadlines. It proves that we are starving for the very thing that makes us whole, real connection. The office door can close, but it doesn't have to seal us off from each other. We must learn to carry the spirit of that connection with us, even when the physical space ends. The healing begins with a simple shift in perspective, seeing our colleagues not just as people we work with, but as the very people we need to stay sane. When we recognize that engagement is a human necessity, not just a business goal, the door stops being a barrier and starts being just a threshold. The office door swings shut, and the silence that follows is heavy with something more than just the end of a meeting. It is the weight of our own isolation. We have built a world of glass walls and high fences, convinced that distance protects us, that separation is the price of professionalism. But when the light goes out in the hallway, a terrifying question remains: have we severed the very thing that makes us human? We are not just coworkers, we are a species wired for connection. The data on loneliness isn't just a chart, it is a diagnosis of our collective soul. We are filling our hours with screens and our rooms with noise, yet the fundamental need for the other person is screaming louder than ever. Is our physical separation actually a spiritual one? When we retreat behind our desks, do we leave our humanity behind? The crisis isn't that we are busy, it is that we are alone in our busyness. We have mistaken the map for the territory, thinking that managing our schedules is the same as managing our lives. But the human heart does not run on a calendar. It runs on the presence of another. When the door closes, we must ask ourselves, did we bring our connection with us, or did we lock it out? This is the inquiry that drives us forward. It is not about fixing a building or a policy, it is about remembering who we are. We are not machines to be optimized, and we are not islands to be defended. We are people, desperate for the simple, profound act of being seen. The question hangs in the air, waiting for an answer that starts not with a meeting, but with a hand extended across the threshold. The door is just a frame. The connection is the only thing that matters. What the data shows, the scale of separation. The numbers paint a stark picture of how quickly our physical landscape changed. Before the pandemic, only 7% of workers who could work remotely did so all the time. By early 2023, that figure had surged to 35%. The shift wasn't gradual, it was seismic. The number of people primarily working from home tripled in just 2 years, jumping from 5.7% in 2019 to 17% in 2021. Even as we settled into a new normal, 13.8% of workers usually worked from home in 2023, still more than double the pre-pandemic rate. But the statistics tell us more than just where people sit, they tell us how they feel. The human cost of this separation is clear. 53% of workers who work from home at least some of the time say it actively hurts their ability to feel connected with coworkers, while only 10% say it helps. We have successfully built a workforce that is highly productive in isolation, but we have inadvertently engineered a system where connection feels like a luxury we can no longer afford. Today, hybrid work is the dominant arrangement, with 51% of remote-capable employees splitting their time between home and office. Yet, for those 51%, the office is no longer the default gathering place. It is a destination we must travel to, a space we must defend against the comfortable pull of our desks. The data confirms what we already sense in our bones. The architecture of our work lives has fundamentally altered the texture of our relationships. We are not just working from different rooms, we are working from different worlds. And in that separation, the simple, unburdened act of being seen with a colleague has become something we have to schedule rather than something that just happens. WHA shows the cost of silence. The numbers paint a stark picture of what happens when the physical distance widens. Fully remote employees report loneliness at 25%, a figure that stands in sharp contrast to 21% of hybrid workers and just 16% of those working exclusively on-site. It suggests that the isolation isn't just about the screen, it is about the total absence of the shared environment that once served as a buffer against the day's pressures. This erosion of connection extends deep into our social circles. Among employees who work exclusively in a remote location, only 15% strongly agree that they have a best friend at work. In a place where we spend the majority of our waking hours, the lack of a trusted confidant is not a minor inconvenience, it is a significant void. The simple act of grabbing coffee to vent about a project becomes a scheduled event, if it happens at all, stripping away the spontaneous intimacy that builds trust. The scale of this crisis is national. In Gallup's August-September 2024 measurement, 20% of U.S. adults, roughly 52 million people, reported feeling loneliness a lot of the day yesterday. That is up from 17-18% in prior quarters. The trend is clear. As we retreat into our individual spaces, the collective feeling of being alone grows louder. The data confirms that the office door is not just a barrier to entry. When it stays closed, it can become a barrier to the very human connection that sustains us. The man and the woman, the message from these numbers is the same. The separation of work and home has created a new kind of solitude. We are not just working from different rooms, we are working from different worlds. And in that separation, the simple, unburdened act of being seen with a colleague has become something we have to schedule rather than something that just happens. What the data shows, the gender divide in connection. The shift to remote work didn't just change where we sat, it changed who we leaned on. While men and women report loneliness at exactly the same rate overall, 20% each for working adults, the pathways to connection have diverged significantly. Women, who made up over half of home-based workers during the pandemic, found themselves disproportionately responsible for maintaining the household front, yet their social strategy revealed a distinct advantage. They turned to friends for emotional support far more often than men did. Specifically, 54% of women reach out to a friend when they need support, compared to only 38% of men. That is a 16-point gap that suggests a fundamental difference in how we seek relief. For women, the circle of friends acts as a primary safety net. For men, that same circle remains more distant. This isn't to say men don't value their friends, it is simply that the habit of turning to them for soft, emotional connection is less established. The data shows that 16% of all Americans feel lonely or isolated most of the time, with men and women reporting these feelings at nearly equal rates. However, the mechanism for escaping that feeling differs. Women actively bridge the gap with friends, while men remain more reliant on other family members or struggle to find that same outlet. The result is a quiet isolation for many men, even as women build a denser web of friendship. We are seeing a world where 25% of young men feel lonely a lot of the time, a rate higher than their female counterparts. The office door may have closed, but for women, the front door to friendship often stayed wide open. For men, that door remained locked. The challenge ahead is not to blame one side for the other's state, but to recognize this specific divergence. Healing requires us to help men build the very habit that comes so naturally to women, the willingness to reach out, to be vulnerable, and to find comfort in the simple, unburdened act of talking to a friend. What the data shows, the trap of commitment. There is a profound paradox at the heart of the modern workplace. While remote work was sold as liberation, the data suggests it has created a new kind of cage. For many, the ability to work from home has become the very thing that traps them in jobs that fail to nourish their social lives. The numbers are stark. According to recent findings, 46% of remote workers say they would be unlikely to stay at their job if they could no longer work from home. Women are slightly more likely than men to voice this intention to leave, with 49% of women compared to 43% of men stating they would depart if the arrangement ended. This reveals a critical vulnerability. For a significant portion of the workforce, the isolation of the home office is not a minor inconvenience, but a decisive factor in their employment satisfaction. This trap is reinforced by the rigid return-to-office mandates that follow. 75% of workers who are not fully remote are now required to work in person a certain number of days, a figure that has climbed from 63% in early 2023. This shift forces a collision between the private sanctuary of the home and the public demands of the office, leaving many feeling squeezed rather than connected. The cost of this friction is measured in silence. the isolation of the remote era has left deep scars on the younger generation. Americans aged 15 to 29 spent about 45% more time alone in 2023 than they did in 2010, with daily solitude rising from 4 hours to 6 hours. When the office door swings shut, it is not just a room that darkens, it is a signal that the connection within us is under threat. The challenge for us all is to ensure that the flexibility of the home does not become the prison of the self. The roots, why we stay. The data reveals a stark reality. 21% of U.S. adults reported feeling lonely in May 2024, and 62% of respondents pointed directly to people working too much as a primary cause of that isolation. The scope is even deeper when we look at who is most affected. 36% of all Americans reported feeling serious loneliness, a figure that jumps to 61% among young adults and 51% among mothers with young children. This isn't just a personal failing, it is a structural shift in how we value time. For decades, the cultural narrative equated busyness with virtue. We were taught that filling every hour meant we were productive, that saying no was a failure of ambition, and that the private sphere of home and family was secondary to the public sphere of work. The office door swinging shut wasn't just closing a room, it was closing a chapter of connection, because the prevailing belief was that if we weren't working, we weren't contributing. We accepted a system where the most valuable human interactions, the ones that sustain our health and sanity, were pushed to the margins, treated as interruptions to the sacred task of being busy. For men, this often meant viewing emotional engagement as a distraction from providing. For women, it frequently meant the crushing weight of managing the household and children alone while returning to a job that demanded their full attention, leaving no energy for the very relationships that could have saved them. The economic engine of our lives ran on the assumption that connection could be deferred. We believed the weekend would fix the week, that the dinner table would restore what the boardroom took away. But as the statistics on serious loneliness show, the damage accumulates when we treat human connection as an afterthought rather than a foundation. We stayed isolated because we were afraid that slowing down would mean falling behind, forgetting that a life lived at the expense of our own humanity is a victory that cannot be kept. The data doesn't point fingers, it points to a shared wound. The statistics on isolation are stark, but the story behind them reveals a system that pressures everyone differently. Men are often measured by their output, their status, and their ability to provide, leading many to retreat into silence when they feel they have failed. Women, frequently the emotional laborers of the home and the office, are exhausted by the constant demand to manage the feelings of everyone around them, leaving little energy for their own connection. This isn't a battle of the sexes, it is a crisis of structure. The very mechanisms we built to succeed, the long hours, the competitive hierarchies, the blurred lines between work and home, are the ones straining the human spirit. When a man comes home and feels he has nothing to give, or a woman feels she has given everything and received nothing, the door doesn't just close, it seals them off from each other. We must resist the urge to blame one side for the other's pain. The man who withdraws isn't necessarily rejecting his partner, he may be overwhelmed by the pressure to be the rock that never cracks. The woman who becomes distant isn't necessarily cold, she may be depleted by the weight of holding everything together. Both are victims of a world that values productivity over presence, and efficiency over empathy. The path forward requires us to see each other clearly, not as the problem, but as fellow travelers carrying the same heavy burden. We have to acknowledge that the isolation we feel is not a personal failing, but a systemic one. When we stop looking for a scapegoat and start looking at the structure, we find the real place to begin healing. It starts with the simple, radical act of reaching out, not to fix, but to witness. We have to tell the person next to us, I see you, and I know you are tired too. That single sentence breaks the seal on the door. So where do we go from here? The data tells us the isolation is real, but it cannot build the bridge. That is our job. Direction is simple, yet it requires a shift in how we approach our own exhaustion. We have to stop treating connection as a reward for finishing our work and start seeing it as the very fuel that allows us to do it. This means making the small, deliberate move of reaching out before the day is truly done. It is not about solving a problem or offering a fix, it is about the act of witnessing itself. When you feel that familiar wall rising, try this, send a message, make the call, or simply say the words out loud to the person next to you. I'm struggling, or I'm just so tired today. For the man, this might mean lowering the guard just enough to let a friend know the weight is on his shoulders. For the woman, it can mean admitting the need for support without feeling like a burden. The specific action is the same for both. Break the silence. Share the feeling of the fatigue itself. When we do this, we do something profound. We signal that we are human, not just a role we are playing. We tell the person on the other end that their presence matters, even when we are at our lowest. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the isolation cracks. The door to the office stays closed, but the door to the human heart swings wide open. That is the path forward. That is how we heal. The path forward begins with a simple, profound shift. We stop trying to fix the symptom and start tending to the wound. For the man, that means allowing himself to be seen without having to immediately solve the problem. For the woman, it means trusting that her vulnerability will not be met with judgment, but with care. We must design our workplaces and our conversations so that when the door closes, the connection doesn't have to. Path to healing begins with recognizing that engagement is not just a business goal, it is a human necessity. We have spent years building walls to protect ourselves from rejection, only to find that those same walls have locked us out of the very people we need most. But the data tells us something hopeful. The desire for connection is not a weakness, it is our most fundamental strength. When we lean into that strength, when we reach out with the courage to say, I am here and I need you, we break the cycle of isolation that has held so many of us captive. This is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about the small, daily acts of reaching across the divide. It is about the man who shares a worry, the woman who offers a listening ear, the colleague who checks in. These are the threads that weave the fabric of our lives together, strong enough to hold us when the world feels heavy. By recognizing the wound, we have already taken the first step toward healing the connection. The door to the office stays closed, but the door to the human heart swings wide open. That is the path forward. That is how we heal. This episode was written by a human and finished by AI. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and please tell a friend. If you have a positive comment, please post it. We would love to read them and see if we are helping anyone. And if you have positive feedback, we would like to hear that as well. Thank you, everyone. God bless. See you in the next one.